The brass compass fell from Thomas Harper's trembling hands, clattering against the wooden floor of his father's study like a death knell. The sound echoed through the cramped cabin aboard the merchant vessel Sarah's Promise, where Captain William Harper lay dying in his narrow bunk, his weathered face pale as morning fog. "What did you just say?" the old captain whispered, his voice barely audible over the creaking of the ship's hull against the Boston harbor dock. Thomas knelt to retrieve the compass, his grandfather's compass, the one that had guided 3 generations of Harper men across treacherous Atlantic waters. His fingers traced the familiar engravings, but now they felt like accusations against his skin. "I said tomorrow we leave the port, Father. I sold your old ship and grandfather's compass." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Captain Harper struggled to sit up, his eyes blazing with the fire that had once commanded respect from hardened sailors across 7 seas. "You did what, boy? That compass has been in our family for 60 years. It belonged to your grandfather, God rest his soul, and his father before him." But Thomas couldn't meet his father's gaze. Instead, he stared out the small porthole at the bustling harbor, where merchant ships prepared for their final voyages before winter storms made the Atlantic passage deadly. Steam rose from the harbor waters in the crisp October morning of 1847, and longshoremen called out to each other as they loaded cargo that would feed distant ports. The familiar sounds that had once brought him comfort now felt like a funeral dirge. "The debts, Father," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "The creditors came yesterday while you were unconscious. They were going to seize everything, the ship, the house on Beacon Hill, even Mother's jewelry. I had to choose." William Harper's breathing grew labored, each word a struggle. "That compass, it's not just brass and glass, Thomas. It holds the soul of our family. Every Harper captain has used it to find his way home. Your grandfather saved 17 men in a hurricane off Cape Hatteras using that compass when every other instrument failed." Thomas finally turned to face his dying father, and the old man saw something in his son's eyes that made his blood run cold. Not just grief, but a terrible secret that seemed to burn behind those familiar blue irises. "There's something else, isn't there?" Captain Harper whispered. The younger Harper's hands shook as he set the compass on the bedside table. At 32, Thomas had spent his entire life in his father's shadow, learning navigation, weather patterns, and the sacred art of commanding men who lived with death as their constant companion. But he had never learned how to carry the weight of betrayal. "The man who bought the compass," Thomas began, then stopped as if the words themselves might damn him. "Who, Thomas? Who did you sell it to?" "Jonathan Blackwood." The name hit Captain Harper like a cannonball to the chest. Jonathan Blackwood, the same man who had destroyed their family's shipping business through underhanded deals and bribed port officials. The same man who had spread rumors about Harper ships carrying contraband, causing their insurance rates to skyrocket. The same man who had sworn after William Harper testified against him in court 5 years ago that he would see every Harper dead or ruined. "Dear God, Thomas," William gasped, clutching his chest. "Do you know what you've done? That compass doesn't just guide ships. It contains a secret that Blackwood has been searching for since your grandfather's time." Thomas felt the walls of the cabin closing in around him. "What secret?" "Father, you never told me, because I prayed you'd never need to know." William Harper's voice rose with desperate strength. "Inside that compass, hidden in a compartment behind the main dial, there's a map. Not just any map. It shows the location of the Isabella Maria, the Spanish treasure ship that your grandfather helped sink in 1798 during the quasi-war with France." The revelation hit Thomas like an icy wave. Stories of the Isabella Maria were legend among sailors. A Spanish galleon loaded with gold from the New World, sunk somewhere off the Carolina coast, with a fortune that could buy a small nation. But they were just stories, weren't they? 15 tons of Spanish gold, Thomas. Enough to clear every debt our family has ever accumulated. Enough to rebuild our shipping empire 10 times over. Your grandfather took the secret to his grave, but he left clues in that compass for the next generation of Harper men. William's voice was fading now, each word an enormous effort. "And you just handed it to our greatest enemy." Thomas stumbled backward, his legs hitting the small chair beside his father's desk. The magnitude of his mistake crashed over him like a rogue wave. He had thought he was saving his family's honor by paying their debts. Instead, he had delivered their salvation directly into the hands of the man who had orchestrated their downfall. "But Father," Thomas whispered, grasping for any hope, "surely Blackwood doesn't know about the secret compartment. Maybe I can get it back, tell him I made a mistake." "Boy, do you think Jonathan Blackwood became the richest man in Boston by being careless?" William Harper's laugh was bitter and weak. "He's been hunting that treasure for 20 years. He knows exactly what that compass contains, and now..." The old captain's voice trailed off as his breathing became more shallow. Outside the cabin, Thomas could hear the harbor master calling out departure times. Ships bound for Liverpool, Charleston, and the Caribbean were preparing to catch the evening tide, but the Sarah's Promise would remain docked, her captain too weak to command and her owner too devastated by his own betrayal to think clearly. "There's more, Thomas," his father whispered, motioning for him to come closer. "The compass. It wasn't the only thing your grandfather left us. Hidden in the ship's ballast, beneath the cargo hold, there's something else. Something Blackwood doesn't know about yet." Thomas leaned in, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged bird. "What is it, father?" But before Captain Harper could answer, heavy footsteps echoed in the companionway outside their cabin. The sound was deliberate, authoritative, not the casual gait of a crew member, but the measured stride of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. A shadow fell across the porthole and Thomas felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Someone was coming, and from the look of terror that flashed across his dying father's face, Thomas knew exactly who it was. The footsteps stopped directly outside their door. 3 deliberate knocks echoed through the cabin, not the rapid rap of a crew member seeking orders, but the slow, calculated rhythm of a man who had all the time in the world because he held all the cards. "Captain Harper," came a voice smooth as silk but cold as January wind. "I trust you're receiving visitors today?" Jonathan Blackwood didn't wait for permission. The door swung open with a confidence that made Thomas's stomach churn. The man who entered was everything Thomas remembered and worse. Tall, impeccably dressed despite the harbor's morning mist, with silver hair perfectly groomed and eyes like polished steel that seemed to catalog every detail of the cramped cabin with predatory precision. "Jonathan," Captain Harper managed, struggling to sit straighter in his bunk. Even dying, the old sailor's pride demanded he face his enemy with dignity. "William." Blackwood's smile was all teeth and no warmth. His gaze swept from the dying captain to Thomas, who stood frozen beside his father's bed. "And young Thomas, how fortuitous that you're both here. It saves me the trouble of hunting you down separately." Thomas felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill seeping through the cabin walls. "Mr. Blackwood, I completed our transaction yesterday as agreed. The compass is yours." "Indeed it is." Blackwood reached into his coat and withdrew the brass compass, holding it up so the morning light caught its polished surface. "A magnificent piece. Your grandfather had exquisite taste in navigation instruments." He turned it over in his hands, examining it like a jeweler appraising a precious stone. "Though I must admit, I was surprised by how easily you parted with such a significant family heirloom." The way Blackwood emphasized the word significant made Thomas's blood run cold. The man knew. Of course he knew. Captain Harper's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the cabin's tension like a blade. "What do you want, Jonathan?" "Want?" Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My dear William, I have everything I want right here in my hand. Well, almost everything." His steel-gray eyes fixed on Thomas with the intensity of a hawk studying a mouse. "You see, young Harper, when I heard you were so desperate to settle your father's debts that you'd sell the family's most treasured possession, I knew fate was finally smiling upon me." Thomas found his voice, though it came out hoarse and strained. "The debts are paid. We have nothing else you could possibly want." "Oh, but you do." Blackwood moved closer to the bed and Thomas caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that reminded him of coffins and grave dirt. "You have knowledge, Thomas. Knowledge that was passed down from your grandfather to your father, and undoubtedly from your father to you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas lied, but his voice cracked like a teenage boy's. Blackwood's smile widened. "The Isabella Maria, Thomas. Your grandfather's greatest secret and my family's greatest loss." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "You see, it wasn't just Spanish gold aboard that ship when your grandfather helped send her to the bottom. There were also letters. Letters that could destroy some of Boston's most prominent families, including my own." Captain Harper struggled to speak, his breathing labored. "The war was over, Jonathan. Those secrets died with the men who wrote them." "Did they, William?" Blackwood knelt beside the dying captain's bed, bringing his face inches from the old man's. "Because I have reason to believe that your father didn't just help sink that ship. He boarded her first. He took something that belonged to my grandfather, something that could still ruin the Blackwood name even 50 years later." Thomas felt the world tilting beneath his feet like a ship in heavy seas. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, dear boy, that your grandfather was a thief as well as a traitor." Blackwood stood and began pacing the small cabin like a caged predator. My grandfather was aboard the Isabella Maria as a passenger, carrying sensitive correspondence for certain influential Americans who had been secretly dealing with Spanish merchants during the embargo. When the ship went down, those letters went with it. But if someone had retrieved them first, the implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Thomas looked at his father, seeing confirmation in the old captain's eyes. The family secret ran deeper than buried treasure. It ran to treason, blackmail, and the kind of political scandal that could topple governments. The compass, Thomas whispered, understanding flooding through him like ice water. It doesn't just show where the ship is. It shows what grandfather took from it. Very good, Blackwood said, clapping slowly. Though I must say, your timing couldn't be better. You see, I have a ship departing on tomorrow's tide, a fast clipper called the Raven's Wing. And you, Thomas Harper, are going to be aboard her. Like hell I am, Thomas snarled, finding his courage at last. Blackwood's laugh was soft and dangerous. Oh, but you are. Because if you're not on that ship when she sails, I'll make sure every newspaper from here to Charleston knows that the Harper family built their fortune on stolen Spanish gold and treasonous correspondence. Your father will die in disgrace. Your family name will be ruined forever, and what's left of your shipping business will be seized by the federal government. Thomas felt trapped like a rat in a sinking ship's hold. And if I come with you, then you help me recover what your grandfather stole. We split the treasure according to a very generous arrangement I've already drawn up, and the Harper family name remains intact. Blackwood's smile turned almost paternal. Think of it as a partnership, Thomas. A chance to right the wrongs of the past and secure your family's future. But there was something in Blackwood's eyes that made Thomas's skin crawl. A cold calculation that suggested partnership was the last thing on the man's mind. Captain Harper grabbed his son's wrist with surprising strength. Thomas, don't trust him. Whatever your grandfather did, whatever he took, it wasn't for greed. Of course not, Blackwood said smoothly. It was for patriotism, wasn't it, William? Your father thought he was protecting American interests. Noble, really. Foolish, but noble. Thomas felt tears burning behind his eyes, not just for his dying father, but for the impossible choice that lay before him. Go with Blackwood and possibly doom himself to a watery grave, or stay and watch his family's legacy crumble into scandal and shame. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope ready to snap. Finally, Blackwood consulted a gold pocket watch with theatrical precision. The tide turns at sunset, Thomas. I'll expect your answer by then. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Thomas, don't think about running. I have men watching every ship in this harbor. As Blackwood's footsteps faded down the companionway, Thomas sank into the chair beside his father's bed, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on his shoulders. Father, he whispered, what did grandfather really take from that ship? Captain Harper's eyes closed, and for a moment Thomas thought he had lost consciousness. Then the old man's voice came, barely audible above the harbor sounds drifting through the porthole. The letters, they weren't just correspondence, son. They were orders. Orders that would prove some of America's most powerful men were planning to sell their own country to Spain in exchange for gold and land grants in the New World. Thomas felt his heart stop. And if those letters still exist, but his father's voice trailed off, and Thomas heard something that made his blood freeze, the sound of his father's breathing stopping altogether. Captain William Harper, the last keeper of the family's most dangerous secret, was dead, and somewhere in the harbor, a ship called the Raven's Wing was preparing to sail toward a treasure that might cost Thomas Harper his life. If this moment of loss and impossible choice has touched your heart, tell me from which city or country you are watching this story unfold. Your connection to this tale means everything. The candles in Captain Harper's cabin flickered as Thomas closed his father's eyes for the final time. The harbor bells were tolling 6 o'clock when he finally stood, his legs unsteady beneath him. 3 hours until Blackwood's deadline. 3 hours to decide whether to sail toward almost certain death or watch his family's name be destroyed forever. Thomas moved to his father's sea chest with mechanical precision, his grief temporarily numbed by the urgent need for answers. If he was going to face Blackwood, he needed to understand exactly what his grandfather had taken from the Isabella Maria. The old chest creaked as he opened it, releasing the familiar scent of salt, tar, and the tobacco his father had favored during long voyages. Beneath layers of charts and navigation tools, Thomas found what he was looking for, his grandfather's personal journal, bound in cracked leather and secured with a brass clasp that had turned green with age. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with careful handwriting that chronicled voyages from Boston to Charleston, from New York to the Caribbean islands where fortunes were made and lost on single cargo runs. Thomas flipped through months of routine entries, wind patterns, cargo manifests, crew complaints, until he found the dates that mattered. October 1798, when the Isabella Maria met her fate off Cape Fear. The Spanish ship burns on the horizon like a funeral pyre, his grandfather had written. Captain Morrison says we did our duty for country and flag, but I cannot shake the feeling that we have done something that will haunt our family for generations to come. Thomas's hands trembled as he turned the page. I boarded her before she went down. God forgive me, I boarded her while Spanish sailors were dying in the water around us. But the letters Morrison spoke of, the proof of American betrayal, they could not be allowed to reach Spanish hands. What I found in the captain's cabin has convinced me that some secrets are too dangerous for any government to possess. The entry ended there, but Thomas noticed something odd about the binding. His fingers explored the journal's spine until he found a hidden pocket sewn into the leather, a compartment so skillfully concealed that it was nearly invisible. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a single sheet of parchment covered in his grandfather's careful script. It wasn't a map to the Isabella Maria's treasure. It was something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. Should any Harper man read these words, the document began, know that the letters I retrieved speak of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of our young government. Senators, congressmen, and merchants whose names grace the most respected buildings in Boston, all planning to partition the Louisiana Territory between Spain and Britain in exchange for personal wealth beyond imagining. The gold aboard the Isabella Maria was not Spanish treasure bound for Europe. It was American payment for American treason. Thomas felt his world collapse around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. The treasure wasn't just gold. It was evidence of a conspiracy so vast it could have torn the United States apart before the nation was barely 20 years old. I have hidden the original letters where no man can find them save one who knows the Harper family secrets, the document continued. They rest not with the Isabella Maria's gold, but in a place that has sheltered Harper men through 3 generations. The compass points true, but only when a Harper man holds it at the place where our family first touched American soil. A knock at the cabin door made Thomas jump. He quickly folded the parchment and slipped it inside his coat. "Thomas," came a woman's voice, soft, concerned, and familiar. "Thomas, may I come in?" Eleanor Whitmore stepped into the cabin, her dark hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet, her blue dress modest but well cut. She was the harbor master's daughter, and Thomas had been courting her for nearly 2 years with dreams of marriage once the family business recovered. But looking at her now, seeing the worry in her green eyes as she took in the scene, his father's still form, the scattered papers, Thomas's haunted expression, he realized how those dreams had just turned to ash. "Eleanor, you shouldn't be here," Thomas said, moving to block her view of his father's body. "Mrs. Morrison from the tavern told me about your father," Eleanor whispered, tears already forming. "Oh, Thomas, I'm so sorry." She moved past him and knelt beside the bed, placing a gentle hand on Captain Harper's forehead, in a gesture so tender it made Thomas's chest ache. "There's more," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "Things I can't tell you. Things that might make you wish you'd never known me." Eleanor rose and turned to face him, her expression fierce despite her tears. "Thomas Harper, I've known you since we were children playing on these very docks. Whatever trouble you're in, whatever burden you're carrying, you don't have to bear it alone." For a moment, Thomas almost told her everything. The weight of his father's death, Blackwood's ultimatum, the terrible secret his grandfather had carried to his grave. It all pressed against his chest like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. But then he remembered Blackwood's cold smile and steely eyes, and he knew he couldn't drag Eleanor into this darkness. "I have to leave Boston," he said instead. "Tonight, on the tide. I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you when I'll be back. Then I'm coming with you." The simple statement hit Thomas like a cannonball. "Eleanor, no. You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "My father told me about the debts, about the creditors, about how you've been trying to save your family's honor. I also know that Jonathan Blackwood has been asking questions about you around the harbor for weeks." Thomas felt his blood turn cold. "What kind of questions?" "About your grandfather's service in the war, about family records and documents, about whether you knew any family secrets that might be valuable to certain parties." Eleanor's grip tightened on his hands. "Thomas, everyone in Boston knows that Blackwood doesn't ask questions unless he already knows the answers. Whatever he wants from you, it's not going to end with a simple business transaction." The truth of her words struck him like lightning. Of course, Blackwood had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The man was too calculating to leave anything to chance. He had probably orchestrated the family's financial crisis, timing it perfectly to coincide with Captain Harper's illness and Thomas's desperation. "There's something else," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My father received word this morning that the Raven's Wing has been provisioned for a journey of at least 6 weeks. That's not a treasure-hunting expedition, Thomas. That's a voyage to somewhere very far away, somewhere Blackwood can make sure you never come back." The pieces of Blackwood's plan suddenly became clear. The man didn't just want the treasure, he wanted Thomas dead, along with anyone else who might know the Harper family secrets. A convenient accident at sea, a tragic drowning during a storm, and the last keeper of his grandfather's dangerous knowledge would be silenced forever. "I have to warn you about something else," Eleanor said, glancing nervously toward the cabin door. "There are men watching your ship, Blackwood's men. They've been there since this morning, making sure you don't run." Thomas moved to the porthole and peered out carefully. Sure enough, 2 men in dark coats stood near the gangplank of the Sarah's Promise, trying to look casual but failing miserably. Their eyes never stopped moving, cataloging everyone who came and went from the Harper ship. "But," Eleanor continued with a small smile, "they're not watching the Mary Catherine." Thomas turned to stare at her. The Mary Catherine was his father's old fishing boat, a small but seaworthy craft that had been moored on the far side of the harbor for months, while Captain Harper was too ill to use her. "Eleanor, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if you're going to face whatever Blackwood has planned, you need more than just courage. You need allies, and you need options he hasn't considered." Her eyes blazed with determination. "My uncle captains a merchant vessel that trades between Charleston and the Caribbean. If we can get you to his ship—" "We?" Thomas interrupted. "Yes, we. Because I meant what I said, Thomas Harper. Whatever happens next, you're not facing it alone." Before Thomas could protest, the sound of boots on the deck above made them both freeze. Heavy, measured footsteps, more than one person, moving with military precision toward the companionway. Eleanor grabbed Thomas's arm. "They're coming early." Thomas's mind raced. Blackwood had said sunset, but it was barely past 6. "Unless—" "He never intended to wait," Thomas whispered, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "The deadline was just to keep me here to make sure I didn't run." The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by the sound of men speaking in low, urgent voices. Eleanor moved to the cabin's small window that faced the stern of the ship. "There's a rope ladder there leading down to the water if we move now." "Eleanor, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm choosing." Her smile was fierce and beautiful and terrifying all at once. "Now grab whatever you need from that chest, because in about 30 seconds, Jonathan Blackwood is going to discover that Thomas Harper is much harder to catch than he expected." As the footsteps reached the bottom of the companionway, Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He grabbed his grandfather's compass from where Blackwood had left it on the desk, apparently so confident in his trap that he hadn't bothered to take it with him, and Eleanor's hand. Together they slipped through the stern window just as voices began calling Thomas's name in the passageway outside. But as they dropped toward the dark harbor waters below, Thomas heard something that made his blood freeze. Jonathan Blackwood's voice, calm and amused, drifting down from the cabin above. "Let them run, gentlemen. After all, rats always return to their nest eventually. And when they do, the rest was lost in the splash of their entry into Boston Harbor." But Thomas had heard enough. Blackwood wasn't just hunting him, he was hurting him, driving him toward some predetermined destination where the real trap waited. If you want more stories like this one that keep you on the edge of your seat, tap the red subscribe button below. It's completely free, and it's how I can keep bringing you tales that I know will capture your imagination and touch your soul. The icy waters of Boston Harbor shocked Thomas's system as he and Eleanor surfaced beneath the Sarah's Promise's stern. Above them, lanterns blazed and voices shouted orders as Blackwood's men searched the ship. But Thomas's mind was already 3 steps ahead, driven by a sudden terrible understanding of what his grandfather's journal had really revealed. "The compass," he gasped, treading water beside Eleanor. "Eleanor, the compass doesn't point to where the treasure is. It points to where the letters are hidden." Eleanor pushed wet hair from her face, her teeth chattering but her eyes alert. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather wrote that the letters rest where our family first touched American soil. The Harpers didn't start in Boston. We started in Charleston in 1695. Thomas felt pieces clicking together in his mind like the tumblers of a lock. "Blackwood isn't taking me to find Spanish gold off Cape Fear. He's taking me to Charleston, to the old family cemetery where my great-great-grandfather is buried. They swam in desperate silence toward the far side of the harbor where the Mary Catherine bobbed at her mooring. Behind them, the shouts from the Sarah's Promise grew more urgent, but Thomas barely heard them. His grandfather's final words echoed in his memory. The compass points true, but only when a Harper man holds it at the place where our family first touched American soil. The Harper family plot in Charleston's St. Philip's Cemetery. That was where the real treasure lay hidden. As they hauled themselves onto the Mary Catherine's deck, Eleanor grabbed Thomas's arm. If you're right, then Blackwood has been planning this for years. He's probably already sent men to Charleston. Thomas wrung salt water from his coat and checked his grandfather's compass, which had somehow survived their desperate swim. The brass was cold against his palm, but the needle spun wildly, as if it couldn't decide which direction to point. Then we get there first. Thomas, that's madness. Charleston is 3 days by fast ship and we're in a fishing boat. But Thomas was already moving, checking the Mary Catherine's rigging with practiced hands. The boat was small but well-maintained. His father had seen to that even during his illness. She could make the journey if the weather held and if they pushed her to her limits. My uncle's ship, Eleanor began, won't reach Charleston before Blackwood's men find what they're looking for, Thomas interrupted. Eleanor, those letters my grandfather took, they don't just implicate a few corrupt politicians. They prove that some of America's founding families were willing to sell pieces of the country to foreign powers. If Blackwood gets his hands on them, he could destroy anyone who stands in his way, Eleanor finished, understanding flooding her features. Or he could sell that information to the highest bidder. Thomas nodded grimly as he began preparing the boat for departure. My grandfather didn't take those letters for treasure. He took them to protect the country he'd helped create, and now it's up to us to finish what he started. As the Mary Catherine's sails filled with the evening wind, Thomas caught sight of the Raven's Wing preparing to depart from the main harbor. Blackwood's ship was larger, faster, and carried a full crew of experienced sailors, but she would have to follow the main shipping lanes while the Mary Catherine could take coastal routes that larger vessels couldn't navigate. The race to Charleston had begun. For 3 days, Thomas and Eleanor pushed themselves and their small vessel to the breaking point. They sailed through night squalls that should have driven them to shelter, navigated treacherous shoals by moonlight, and survived on hardtack and water while the autumn wind drove them south along the American coast. Eleanor proved herself a natural sailor, anticipating the boat's needs almost before Thomas could voice them. During their brief rest periods, huddled together in the small cabin for warmth, she helped him decode more of his grandfather's cryptic journal entries. "Look at this," Eleanor said on their second night, pointing to a passage Thomas had missed. "The sacred ground where James Harper first knelt to thank Providence for safe passage holds more than bones and memories. 7 paces south from the family stone, beneath the roots of the oak that shelters our ancestors, lies the truth that could topple nations." Thomas studied the words by lamplight as the boat rode the swells off the Carolina coast. 7 paces south from the family headstone. But Eleanor, the oak tree my grandfather mentioned, it was cut down 20 years ago to make room for new burials. "Then we'll have to judge where it stood," Eleanor said simply, "and hope we're right." On their third dawn, the spires of Charleston rose from the coastal mist like promises of salvation or doom. Thomas couldn't tell which. The Mary Catherine limped into Charleston harbor with her sails patched and her crew exhausted, but they had made it. More importantly, there was no sign of the Raven's Wing. St. Philip's Cemetery lay in the heart of Charleston's historic district, its weathered headstones and moss-draped monuments standing silent witness to 3 centuries of American history. Thomas and Eleanor moved through the early morning shadows like ghosts themselves, searching for the Harper family plot among the maze of graves. They found it beneath a massive oak tree, not the one from his grandfather's journal, but its successor, planted in the same spot and now grown large enough to shelter the family stones with its spreading branches. James Harper, 1645–1701, first of the American Harpers, who had brought his family across the Atlantic in search of freedom and fortune. Thomas knelt beside the weathered headstone and pulled out his grandfather's compass. For the first time since Boston, the needle pointed steady and true, due south toward a section of cemetery that seemed to contain only empty ground. 7 paces, Eleanor whispered. Thomas counted them out, his heart hammering against his ribs. 7 paces brought him to what appeared to be unmarked earth beneath the oak's ancient roots. But as he knelt and brushed away centuries of fallen leaves, his fingers found the edges of a stone marker so old and weathered it was nearly invisible. "Help me," he whispered to Eleanor. Together, They dug with their bare hands until they uncovered a small metal box, green with verdigris but still intact. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had somehow survived 50 years underground, lay a collection of documents that would have changed the course of American history. Letters bearing the seals of senators and congressmen, maps showing proposed divisions of American territory, payment schedules for bribes that would have made their recipients richer than kings. And at the bottom of the collection, a letter that made Thomas's blood run cold. It was addressed to his grandfather, signed by President John Adams himself. "Mr. Harper," it read, "your service to this nation in preventing these documents from reaching foreign hands cannot be overstated. However, their very existence poses a continuing threat to the stability of our young republic. I have decided that these letters must disappear forever, and I am trusting you to ensure that they never see the light of day again. Thomas." Eleanor's voice was tight with fear. "Someone's coming." He looked up to see a figure emerging from behind a distant monument, a man in a dark coat, walking with the measured stride Thomas had learned to dread. Jonathan Blackwood had arrived in Charleston after all, but as the man drew closer, Thomas realized something that made his heart stop. It wasn't Blackwood. It was Captain Morrison, the man mentioned in his grandfather's journal, the officer who had ordered the attack on the Isabella Maria. But that was impossible. Captain Morrison would be nearly 90 years old if he were still alive. "You must be Thomas Harper," the stranger said as he approached. His voice was cultured, educated, with the faint trace of a southern accent. "I've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, rising to his feet with the precious documents clutched in his hands. "My name is Morrison. Captain James Morrison, United States Navy, retired." The man's smile was sad but genuine. "And I'm the son of the man who changed your family's destiny 50 years ago." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. "Your father ordered your grandfather to board the Isabella Maria, yes, but not for treasure, Mr. Harper. For justice." Morrison gestured toward the documents in Thomas's hands. "Those letters represent the greatest threat our republic has ever faced. Not from foreign enemies, but from enemies within. Men who would have sold American soil for Spanish gold." "But Blackwood, Jonathan Blackwood's grandfather was mentioned in those letters, Mr. Harper. His family fortune was built on planned treason that your grandfather stopped. Everything Blackwood has done, ruining your family's business, forcing you into debt, hunting for these documents, has been an attempt to erase the evidence of his family's shame." Thomas felt the weight of 50 years of deception settling on his shoulders. "Then what happens now?" Morrison reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. "Now you choose, Mr. Harper. I have here a commission from the Department of the Navy. Your father's death has been reported to us along with Blackwood's activities in Boston. The government is prepared to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" "Burn those letters here and now as President Adams originally intended, and accept a full pardon for your family, along with a commission as captain in the United States Navy. Your debts will be forgiven, your reputation restored, and the Harper name will be honored for its service to the nation." Morrison paused, studying Thomas's face. "Or keep the letters, expose the conspiracy, and watch the resulting scandal tear apart some of America's oldest families, while you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder for Blackwood's assassins." Thomas looked down at the documents in his hands. Evidence of treason that could destroy powerful men, but which would also destroy the very country his family had served for 3 generations. He thought of his father's dying words, of his grandfather's courage in boarding a burning Spanish ship, of Eleanor's faith in him despite the danger he had brought into her life. "The letters burn," Thomas said finally, handing them to Morrison. "But I want something else in return. Name it. Jonathan Blackwood. I want justice for what he did to my family." Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. "Mr. Harper, when the federal marshals finish examining Mr. Blackwood's business practices, I suspect he'll be too busy defending himself against charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to trouble the Harper family ever again." As the treasonous letters burned in the morning sun, filling the Charleston air with smoke and the ghosts of old conspiracies, Thomas felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that had been carried by 3 generations of Harper men. Eleanor slipped her hand into his as they watched the flames consume 50 years of dangerous secrets. "So what happens now?" she asked. Thomas pulled his grandfather's compass from his pocket and watched as the needle spun freely, no longer bound to point toward buried secrets. For the first time in his life, it pointed toward true north, toward home, toward honor, toward a future unburdened by the sins of the past. "Now," he said, turning to face Eleanor with a smile that felt like sunrise after the longest night of his life. We go home, and tomorrow, we start building something new. Behind them, the ashes of treason scattered on the Charleston wind, while ahead lay the promise of a life lived in the light rather than the shadows of buried secrets. The Harper family's greatest treasure hadn't been Spanish gold after all. It had been the courage to choose country over profit, honor over wealth, and truth over the easy path of revenge. And as Thomas Harper walked away from his grandfather's grave with his hand in Eleanor's, he knew that some treasures were worth more than all the gold in the world. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and choosing honor over revenge has spoken to your heart, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for free. That's how you and I can stay connected through every new tale of adventure, mystery, and the human spirit triumphing over darkness.